Hey, welcome back to Coach's Round Corner. I'm here with Dr. Sean McBride, and today's conversation is a little personalized for me. I came to Sean this afternoon for a couple things. One is I've been experiencing a little bit of referral pain in my shoulder that I don't actually think it's my shoulder because I've spent quite a bit of time smashing the crap out of it, literally. And so through conversation, a couple of my clients that I'm working with have also, during this last year, started experiencing more pain around the shoulder. So, some of them are having a line that comes from kind of neck across the shoulders, such as mine. Others seem to be more like a band that kind of wraps from the back to the front. And so we thought that this might be a great opportunity to open a discussion about shoulder and shoulder injuries.
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing to know is shoulder injuries are the most common athletic injuries in lots of different kinds of sports and athletic activities: weightlifting, gymnastics, CrossFit, which is weightlifting plus gymnastics. So, in the kinds of populations that we generally see, or at least that I see mostly in my clinical practice, shoulder injuries are by far and away the highest number of injuries. And within shoulder injuries, different spectrums of injury of the rotator cuff are the most common types of injury. And I say a spectrum of injury because it's not like you're 100% healthy or 100% injured. There's degrees of that. And within that, most people are pretty functional. And I would say, based on some of the studies that we know about of uninjured or healthy population, not having pain is not the same as having no issues in your physiology. What we know is up to half of people have some sort of identifiable structural deficit or damage or historical damage to their shoulder in uninjured and pain-free populations. And so, if you ever get, say, an MRI of your shoulder, the likelihood that you're gonna see something, if you're an athletic person, is close to 100%. So basically we think of this as needing to have some clinical correlation, and this is what I will actually address your question. So if we look at the rotator cuff, I'm gonna show from the right, but imagine this was Diane's shoulder here. If we just kind of flip that around, we'll just kind of identify some of the basic structures. The scapula is the bone here, the humerus is the arm bone, and the scapulohumeral joint is what we think of as the shoulder joint generally. We have the spine of the scapula here that kind of ends in the acromion, and most people can identify this. If you just go to the outside of your shoulder and kind of find that bone, kind of tap on it, that's an easy landmark. Most people can feel that there. And from there, it's easy to find the shoulder muscles. You have your Supraspinatus, which is Latin for above the spine, referring to this spine here, which I actually always found very comforting, because if I could remember enough Latin, I could just be like, this is the above the spine muscle, and then this is the infraspinatus, which is the below the spine muscle. You also have the teres minor, which kind of blends in. Functionally, I don't think of that. You kind of have these muscles below, these muscles above. From an athlete's perspective, I don't particularly need to know the difference between this little stripe of muscle and that little stripe of muscle.
Wait, I can't just activate that one by itself in isolation?
Just not you. I can. You can. So once you know where that is, we can start to actually address some of those questions. So commonly when you have pain in the supraspinatus, that's most often because it gets pinched as it goes under this ridge of bone. And if there's not enough space in this area, and there's not a lot of space there. If the shoulder is riding high, if you have kind of a closed down space at your shoulder joint there, then it's easy to get that trapped as you take that through a range of motion. And so this is most often kind of pinched in motions where you're going around or up, and it just kind of gets jammed there. And so the referral pattern is gonna be kind of from the acromion and down. And we oftentimes see kind of this general pattern is kind of the supraspinatus referral pattern. So, if it goes past this deltoid insertion, if it goes past the end of the deltoid, you see there's usually a nice little muscular indentation at the deltoid. If it goes down further than that, that's usually something else that might be more of like a referral pattern from the neck. But if it goes down about halfway down the arm to about here, or it just kind of stays right in this area, that's usually something that's coming from the supraspinatus getting pinched or trapped in there. As opposed to, we've got our infraspinatus that kind of wraps around, and so more of a wrapping around type pain. That's the type of pain that I would expect from more of an infraspinatus referral pattern. Now, that's getting really ticky-tacky, honestly, when I'm treating the rotator cuff. If it's this, I'm still gonna do a little work here, and if it's there, I'm still gonna do a little work here, because you can definitely improve by improving in the neighborhood. So if you're not really sure, we'll just work on both. It's really not that much more work, and there's things of value to be gained, whether it's super specific or not. So that's kind of the general overview of things in that area, kind of referring to the rotator cuff.
Excellent. So from here, I think what we'd like to show you is, some of the, techniques that maybe athletes can start to address or solve for their own kind of referral pattern pains at home.
Absolutely. So I'm big on testing. I always want to have a test and a retest, and there's a couple of really easy at-home tests that you can see if someone is missing some sort of rotator cuff range of motion. So Di, if you want to lie on your back with your head up here. So the first and easiest one is just go overhead. So what we can see, and Diane is maybe the best, most flexible person that I know, and her shoulder's stiff, right? This is not full range of motion. Full range of motion is this shoulder can go all the way down to the table, and I'm not expressing any tightness here. So if you kind of see, this should be a straight line. We see an angle at the shoulder. You look at the bend for where the stiffness is gonna be. So I'm gonna find that right there, right? That sucks. And you're not making a face because you're on video. That's the only reason why you're not making a face. So a simple overhead test. Now this position as well, if I go here and I can kind of elevate the rib cage, or I see a gap here, it also sort of implicates the lats here as part of the issue here. So there's a number of things we can see, but we'll kind of look there for this kind of flexibility and down here for this kind of flexibility. So we got two things on our list already. And the next we're gonna look at is internal rotation. So again, we always test this by pushing the shoulder down, and that's kind of compressing the head of the humerus back into the back of the shoulder capsule, which shortens the distance of that rotator cuff. But if that's tight, why is that stiff?
I don't know.
Why is that stiff? Come on.
No reason.
So what you're testing here, if you think about what we're actually moving, this is more of that infraspinatus in here. It's a little supraspinatus, but we're testing some stiffness in that position. The other way we can test it is arm across body. So if I say normally you should be able to get your arm to your other shoulder and your elbow well past the midline as kind of by your nose, that's true, but what we can see, because there's a lot of stiffness right here, is this is mostly just your shoulder blade moving around. And if I actually block your shoulder blade down to the body, that's your actual shoulder range of motion. And even on the most flexible person I know, I can find that stiffness there because that tissue right there is really, really tight. And that again is a little more infraspinatus. What we were talking about earlier off camera beforehand was, your specific thing was you felt a little tight right here. If you go ahead and sit up for a sec. There's a really easy little test, right? We were talking about the acromion, so we find that bone right here. And if you go to the edge of that bone, you come off the side of that bone, you should be able to feel the head of the humerus. You do have to go through the deltoid muscle, and Diane's pretty jacked, so you gotta kind of gently kind of come through. There should be a little separation between those two, and right now, there's like none. It's just like, there's just no gap. There's no distance between the humerus and the acromion, and there should be a little bit here because it's gotta have some space to pivot and spin, and if it's just jammed up in there, it's like totally bound together, which is why when you're moving your arm, your scapula is doing a lot of the moving, and your shoulder itself is not doing as much of the moving. So that's another place to kind of test for. Now what we're gonna do to work on that is basically take your lacrosse ball, and you're just gonna kind of go into those tight places. Any place that felt tight, then we're gonna do some work to make it less tight. So this is where our classic mobilizations come in. And for a lot of people, they look like this, where it's like, yeah, you're tight here, you're tight here, you're tight back here, you're tight going overhead, you're tight in internal rotation, you're tight in your lats. So where do you start? It's like, doesn't matter, just anywhere.
It's like cleaning a messy room. You just start somewhere.
Just pick something up, put it away, and then you start taking it down one step at a time after that. So I will go as specific as possible. So, where I would go is start with some soft tissue work into the infraspinatus, if that's the tightest tissue there. So you just do a little basic mobilization in that area. You could use a Theragun, a hypervolt, you could get more professional massage on that area if that's something you want to do. But the lacrosse ball is by far the easiest, most user-friendly, and I actually kind of like that. I, as a therapist, sometimes overtreat that area because I'm just so gung-ho, but this is super sensitive. These are teeny tiny little muscles. I mean, look at this muscle. This is not your quad, right? This is not your calf. This is not your glute, right? These are very, very, even in strong people, they're not very big muscles. And so it's possible to get a tremendous amount of pressure. I don't need to take my elbow and elbow drop your rotator cuff. A little bit of pressure on a sensitive tight muscle will be totally sufficient. And that kind of goes to like my basic philosophy with soft tissue work is I think sometimes we're a little overeager to be in as much pain as possible. I think it's more about the output, right? I only care about what I'm going to take away from that. So I really want to use the least amount of pressure that I need to. The minimum dose to improve is the best dose because then I'll tolerate that. So we got kind of soft tissue work on the back of the arm there. And if you want to kind of real quick kind of run through, where I'll go is just kind of go straight onto your back. Arm is going to be kind of out to the side so you can get onto where we're functionally on. We're putting the ball kind of right here on these muscles here, but kind of closer to the edge. And then we can start working a little rotation work here. We can do a little kind of a side sweep kind of thing. And wherever you feel a little tightness, and it's going to be a little hard to feel here on the table because the table is a little soft, but you can do a little contract and relax work. Now this is all well and good, but you're not getting a ton of pressure here. So that's where we're going to get you up and over into kind of our sleeper position. But I think this is like a better sleeper position, right? You want to pull this shoulder back, right? You're getting your body up and over. And then before you jump into the movement, do a couple rounds of just basic contract and relax. You kind of drive your elbow down into the table. That's going to activate those muscles. And this does what I think of as localizing or focusing that mobilization onto that. If your neck feels like it's working, you can take your other hand, make fist pillow, which is by far the hardest pillow you can have. All right, and then we can start to go into a little movement, but you're only just looking for the limit of stiffness. You might not go full range of motion. You have a big stick in the spokes with a lacrosse ball in those positions there. Good. And then from here, it's very easy to kind of turn this into a classic lat mobilization where we're just going after kind of the back of the armpit. And we can, again, just do kind of contract, just drive the arm down into the table, relax, and just melt. Just feel all those muscles soften up and relax. Now, that's a minimum dose. We're just kind of by example going through, but let's just real quick have you lie on your back and we can do a real quick retest. Take the ball out here, have you retest this overhead position. Already we're seeing a big improvement in kind of functional range, not having to compensate as much. Certainly we could do like a little partner lat mobilization here. This is like our kind of foot into the armpit mobilization. That's one of my favorites from way back in the day, but even just kind of a quarter dose that we just did resulted in a massive improvement. And how does it feel to the shoulder?
So some reflections on that. Earlier when I was going overhead, I started to feel the pinch, which is why I paused.
Right.
And now I can go through without that impingement happening.
Right, so you just sort of cleared that space up. And again, this is just a really generic, like each part of the rotator cuff, we're just hitting that and getting a little basic soft tissue work. Now, if you want to do a little kind of more classic capsular mobilization, there's a couple ways you can do that, but I actually like this one on the table. If you roll onto your side here, kind of back into that sleeper position, drive that shoulder back, because again, you're trying to keep your shoulder in a really good position, or basic rule, always mobilize in a good position, so you shouldn't have your shoulder smushed out. And we were trying to get this elbow further across, but we can use the whole weight of the body. The table or the floor is going to stabilize that scapula, so you're not going to be able to compensate by sending your shoulder blade around. So you just sort of do a contract to engage that rotator cuff. And as you relax, you just let the weight of your body roll over, and you should be able to localize a really good stretch right into the back of the rotator cuff. And I think this is really good because it's basically just a loaded functional version of that across body test. And what we're really trying to do is just free that shoulder from the scapula so they can disarticulate. They should be able to move in a coordinated fashion, but still separately from each other. We're trying to make sure they don't get totally blocked down and locked to each other. Great, and I think 3 or 4 or 5 of those is enough. You don't have to keep going once you get to that position. If we go back and just kind of test what you were just doing, block that shoulder blade, look how much improvement. I mean, that's 3 cycles of contract and relax, and you've already made a massive improvement. And then see what that does. Now we're all the way overhead, totally free. And if you are snatching, I mean, that's all the range of motion you need, but you've got that in reserve. You can go all the way to kettlebell overhead squat with that kind of range of motion.
That's great.
So those are my basic thoughts on, a coach's need to understand the rotator cuff is just see it expressed as specific patterns of pain. It does have characteristics and characteristic patterns of stiffness, and we kind of demystify it if you take it down to its component parts.
I appreciate that, Sean. So I'm sure you guys all wish you had a pocket PT in your home. Until then, you guys can keep tuning in next time for the Coaches Roundtable, and we'll keep popping this information at you. Thanks.